Well, hello and welcome to everybody to the Y Factor podcast. My name is Ian Bates, and I'm thrilled to have with me today Pierre Paslier.
That's
Paslier. Is that,
French.
did I pronounce that badly?
Yeah, that's good. Good pronunciation. Good French.
Fantastic. Well, look, you're very welcome. And uh, Pierre is the CEO and also the or co-CEO and co-founder of Notpla. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah,
And Notpla is shortened from not plastic, I believe. Yeah.
yeah. It works both for not plastic and not PLA. We'll get into
Fant- Fantastic. Well, a little bit of background about Pierre before we get into some questions. Pierre is a design engineer who spent his career exploring the intersection of design and technology. He started his career at L'Oreal as a packaging engineer, where he worked during the day and then experimented with 3D printing in the evening or in his free time. His passion for innovation led him to study design at the Royal College of Art, where he co-designed one of the first consumer Delta 3D printers. And of course, you studied at INSA de Lyon is that in Paris?
in Lyon.
In Lyon,
Yeah.
okay. Oh, in Lyon, of course, yeah. After completing his studies, Pierre co-founded two startups, Gravity Sketch, which creates 3D designs in virtual reality, and Notpla, which focuses on developing sustainable packaging. Notpla was started actually originally in 2017, following a crowd fund which raised about £1 million from 900 investors. Wow, that is impressive. Currently the CEO of Notpla, where he is dedicated to finding solutions to the global plastic crisis through his work on packaging made from seaweed. Notpla won the Prince William's £1 million Earthshot Prize in 2022, which then led on to a £25 million investment or further investment. And I guess you've had other investments since, which
No,
maybe
so that
you,
was last year, and that was in dollars, but like $25 million. Right.
okay,
Yeah.
still a significant
Still a
amount, eh?
significant amount.
Pierre has a master's degree and from the RCA's Innovation Design Engineering program from Lyon, as we talked about. He's written articles for Wired magazine and given presentations at TEDx, conferences in Athens and Warwick. He is a fellow of the Royal Academy of Engineering Enterprise Hub and a member of the Industrial Advisory Board of Imperial College London, Dyson School of Design Engineering. Whoa, that's impressive. Really impressive. So, I mean, how old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
38.
38. Wow. To have achieved all of that in such a short space of time. So, look, my first question, Pierre, is let's start at the beginning. What made you, as a design engineer, want to swap plastic bottles for seaweed bubbles?
Yeah. Well, as you alluded to, I actually my first job was as a plastics packaging engineer, working in the cosmetic industry, and so I was very well aware of kind of like all the technology that we've created with plastic to create those incredibly efficient production lines. They do the job very well. They fill those like plastic tubes and bottles and jars at incredible speed. Everything is kind of like very, very good on the manufacturing side. But obviously, all of that material ends up somewhere. And there we have much less of a organized, efficient solution to deal with that waste that we produce at incredible speed. And so after a few years working in at L'Oreal, I felt increasingly kind of um, like not really interested in continuing to pursue just the business as usual, but wanting to be more part of like the solution to the problem of plastic. Don't have, like people are very conscious of like the limitations of plastic, but essentially it's indestructible. Nature doesn't know how to break it down. It will only fragment into smaller and smaller chunks of microplastic, which finds its way in nature. It's in our blood. It's in every organ that has been kind of like tested in the human body, and it's starting to kind of like really have some negative implications. And so um, I actually kind of like really didn't plan to go back into packaging when I quit my job at L'Oréal and I came to
Right.
study this master's in at the Royal College of Art and Imperial College. I really thought that I was going to move on to other things. And in a way, you mentioned like one of the projects that I started there with a few other kind of like classmates, Gravity Sketch, was looking at virtual reality and how we can use that to create in like 3D and so on. But somehow packaging kind of like caught me back when with my
Mhm.
co-founder Rodrigo, um, we started to experiment in our kitchen, in our student kitchen, with something that never pretended to be a like a industrial solution that was going to be kind of like turning into a startup and a full business. It was really an exploration. We were playing and being creative with natural materials with this slight kind of like exciting proposition of creating a man-made fruit. We
So
thought
what brought you to seaweed out of interest? Why seaweed? I mean, how did
the
you land on that?
we actually kind of like we didn't start with seaweed. We wanted to create this like this man-made fruit, this packaging that feels more like nature. And so we tried all sorts of things. We tried gums and starches and hydrogels and fibers and all sorts of things that come from nature. And eventually we stumbled upon fake caviar. And if you've ever had those little kind of like fake fish eggs,
Mhm.
they're actually an invention from Unilever from the 1940s for making a very cheap alternative to the real caviar. And they're made from seaweed. They're made from a process called spherification that like takes an extract from brown seaweed, reacts it with some of the salts that are dissolved in the ocean water. And that way you can encapsulate in a little membrane made of the thing that holds seaweed together, a little dose of flavored water, and
Huh.
that's how they created this technology back then. And that was kind of like a bit of an aha moment. We're like, wow, these things are made from seaweed. That's like we didn't expect that. But
Mm.
then realizing that this edible material, this little membrane, could possibly be kind of like made bigger and bigger and not just like tiny millimeter
Mm.
scale kind of like droplets. That was really exciting. So we got ourselves some extracts from seaweed that we bought from Alibaba, and we kind of like started to mess around in the kitchen, making
Right.
the bubbles bigger and bigger and bigger, filling them not with like fish flavored water, but with kind of like juices and water and different kind of like drinks. And it was terrible, but it was working enough to make a video out of it that says, hey, we've created this weird edible packaging, and
Right.
this potentially is kind of like a much more kind of like natural alternative to plastic. And that video went completely unexpectedly viral. And so over the summer, after kind of like millions of views on those videos and a bit of a tutorial, we were like
I remember
telling
it.
people
Yeah.
how to kind of like make this in their kitchen.
Yeah.
We were overwhelmed by the kind of like the response of people who were like, oh my God, like what if the world was full of those kinds of packaging? That would be wonderful. And at that point, we felt, okay, maybe we have a bit of a responsibility to take it a step forward, not leave it in the kitchen as a 1 month student project, but actually kind of like try to do something with it.
And then GSK Lucasade picked it up, and you did, was it 40,000 for the London Marathon, I believe?
Yeah, so a few kind of like like in the early days we did this in our kitchen, and we actually stayed in the kitchen for the first kind of like year and a half. But eventually we refine a bit the kitchen process, but quickly we realized that we were out of our depth when it comes to the exact kind of like chemistry of that seaweed technology. So we started to reach out to some PhDs and kind of like students in Imperial who had like studied those things and knew how to kind of like to do that kind of like a little bit more precisely. And so we started to have like a little bit of progress, but still making things very manually. And then we started to reach out to like people who could help us to make a more industrial process for making this, because it was never going to be possible to make them one by one by hand in the kitchen. So we developed a machine and that machine was able to produce thousands, tens of thousands. And at that time we convinced small marathon organizers to kind of like trial it, and it caught the attention of Lucozade. And so in 2019, after kind of like a few successful smaller trials, they lined us up for the London Marathon, and it was super exciting to have a dedicated kind of like hydration station where no plastic was used, and that was a big success. We hydrated with Lucozade kind of like filled bubbles,
Mm.
the 40,000 runners of the London Marathon. There wasn't like plastic on the ground like there is in every single other station.
You couldn't have asked for a better way to launch a business, could you?
Yes, no, it was very kind of like it was very cool, and it was also very much aligned with the moment where I think we went from knowing about the plastic production, the plastic problem very uh, like from a fact and figures perspective to
Mm.
having more of an emotional connection with it. It was like
Yeah.
Blue Planet 2, the turtle with like the straw in its nose, and I think that there was a real moment of kind of like realizing that actually plastic is really kind of like a problem for the ocean, and the ocean is crucial for us. And so there was a real wave that I think kind of like came at the right moment for us to start doing this at a larger scale, and as you said, like start raising funding from the crowd initially, and then from kind of like VC funds, and try to really develop this as a industrial technology more than like a demo.
I mean, you've now moved on, haven't you, from, well, you're obviously still making the capsules, but you're now taking that technology and doing other things with it. Do you want to explain
Yeah.
what, if you can?
So essentially, once we've kind of like we had realized that there were things in seaweed that we could use for creating those alternatives to kind of like plastic, and that we could keep them importantly like completely in their natural state, so we don't do any chemical modification at Notpla. That's actually why we've been like still to this day the only certified kind of like plastic-free solution that the Dutch government has found when they started to review the market. We've really kind of like followed the principles that we're going to use things the way they exist in nature without trying to kind of like change them into something that nature doesn't know, which makes it extremely kind of like easy for nature to biodegrade.
Hmm.
Uh, we realized that there were other places where plastic is used where those seaweed materials could be like a good alternative, and the one that has really taken off the most is for takeaway food containers for
Yeah.
food service.
Yeah.
All of the kind of like switch from full plastic to board or kind of like cardboard looking like solutions, it actually kind of like is a bit misleading because it's never just board. There's always a
Yeah.
thin layer that provides the resistance to the grease and moisture. Otherwise, like the cellulose kind of like cannot hold the food. And so that additional barrier, usually it's either plastic, whether it's a petro-derived plastic or a bio-derived plastic, but it's still kind of like plastic nonetheless. Or there are like other categories of chemicals that are of concern, like PFAS. And so we felt that there was a really good kind of like use case for seaweed because the time of consumption there is quite short. And so by coating seaweed inside of those kind of like boxes, whether it's for like food that is you get delivered at home with like Just Eat, or that you consume in like festivals or in stadiums or Winter Wonderland or like on the campus of your university, there's like tons of those kind of like moments where we rely on those disposable items, and they are coming with this thin layer of plastic, which is on one end going to create a forever waste, and on another end is actually kind of like, especially in contact with hot food, is leaching microplastics and chemicals into the food, because we know that like plastic in contact with hot food, the grease and moisture, there is like all of that diffusion and migration. So it felt like there was a real need for something that was like completely natural, and so we started to work more precisely on this. And in this case, we really wanted to have something that wasn't going to require new machines, because we had spent too much time making those first machines for the capsules. And so we really like started to work with the existing industry and try to fit inside of their kind of like process
Drop in
what is the
technology. Yeah.
plastic and petrochemicals for seaweed.
And in terms of scalability, I mean, a lot of people listening to this will think, oh, yeah, but that's just niche. Have you been able to really reach scale, and what does the next 10 years look like?
Yeah. So I think, I mean, um, I think developing new materials takes time and efforts, and we've been doing this for kind of like a while now, and I totally appreciate the usual kind of like dismissal of those solutions are just being kind of like a good lab demo. For a good time of our existence, we were not at scale. The change really happened like for us about 2 years ago when we validated a large manufacturing plant to produce this at scale for us. And so our partners, they're actually based in like Macclesfield, near Manchester. They were able to produce at industrial speed with our material. And all of a sudden that opened the floodgates of kind of like manufacturing capacity. And so in the last kind of like those last couple of years, we've been able to kind of like replace now 30 million single-use plastics. We're active
30
in
million. Wow.
11 countries. We have kind of like large contracts with contract caterers like Compass Group, Aramark, Sodexo. We're really kind of like working in venues that are kind of like considered the kind of like the gold standard when it comes to the products that they use. Wimbledon has been using
I
Notpla
noticed. Yeah.
for the second year in a row. The O2, Twickenham Oval, Chelsea, Tottenham, like all of those venues have switched to Notpla. So,
So it
kind of
must be
like been,
therefore it must be commercially
yeah,
viable in because I know how hard it is to get into those sectors. So it must
exactly.
be
And I think
commercially
that
viable.
one of the things that has been really exciting is that it's a little bit the chicken and egg. Price is directly correlated to kind of like the volumes that we can do in a single batch of production. When we do kind of like start and stop on those machines, it's obviously going to cost more than if we do kind of like a long production campaign. And so by kind of like getting the few early adopters, we've been able to kind of like pull volumes, and like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like in the last 2 years, I think we've brought the cost down by 40%.
Have
And
you really?
it's
Wow.
only kind of like the beginning because we're reaching levels of kind of like efficiency that we couldn't have before because we were producing still kind of like smaller batches. And I think there's still some kind of like a long way to go. Like when you look at plastic, when I was back to my kind of like L'Oreal days, the amount of investment that has gone into making this technology
Yeah.
efficient,
A
it's
long
like
time.
in the hundreds of billions. It
Yeah.
took us two world wars to get plastic from a kind of like a demo in the lab to actually kind of like the ubiquitous material that we use everywhere.
Well, thinking about a bit of history, because I love the story about why you're located in Hackney Wick in London. Tell us that story, would you please?
Yeah. So the story starts 150 years ago when another materials innovator, Alexander Parks, actually kind of like came up with the very first plastic. And where was he located? In East London, in Hackney Wick. There is literally a plaque on the wall. It's like just around the corner from where we are based. That
Amazing.
says first plastic in the world, and it's actually quite incredible. Like we found some of his notebooks from that time where he was saying like this material has great promise, but I don't think it's ever going to scale because it's too expensive and like it doesn't run really well on like machinery and all of the same challenges that we kind of like have faced.
Sounds familiar, right?
And so, unfortunately for him, he actually kind of like didn't manage to kind of like keep the
Scale it.
business afloat. And like within a few years, he actually kind of like closed down. The patent was bought by one of his engineers who set up shop across the street and started the Zeolite company. And that was one of the first like more successful UK-based plastic company. And eventually there were kind of like similar attempts in the US, but like for the most part from the 1860s to kind of like the First World War, the use case for plastic were very limited. And it really is when we started to kind of like invest insane amount of kind of like efforts and energy into these that we started to crack some of the more successful categories of plastics like the polyolefins. So when you look at plastic, it hasn't been a kind of like hockey stick curve from the early days. It actually took a lot of the efforts that like those generations of engineers and kind of like chemists put in. And so it's a cautionary tale because like Alexander Parks never thought of the consequences to the world of releasing this. For us, it was really important from the day one that we realized whether starting working with seaweed was ever going to create like the next like environmental disaster. So we really kind of like like dived deep into seaweed to know that is actually the most kind of like scalable biomass there is. Actually, a lot of the petroleum that we have, it's just old dead seaweed from like millions of years ago.
Of course. Yeah.
So let's use the fresh living seaweed rather than the old kind of like stock. But yeah, like it's quite a funny kind of like wink of history that we are literally on the grounds of the invention of plastic.
And seaweed grows at an incredible pace, doesn't it? Or some of the strains.
It's yeah, it's unbelievable. Like I finally got the chance like a couple of years ago to go to Cape Town where they have one of the fastest growing species of kelp there. It's not the fastest growing, but like it's the one that I've experienced. Eclonia maxima. It can grow 50 centimeter in a day. It's just unbelievable to
It's
think that
insane.
it can grow that fast. And there's even some species that like grow even faster, like the macrocystis. So incredibly renewable, available on pretty much every coastline, different species, but essentially like it is a worldwide, well-distributed resource, unlike petroleum that is in the hands of like a handful of countries.
And I think important, sorry to cut you off, but I think importantly, what people don't realize that with regenerative materials like seaweed, they are absorbing carbon dioxide. And that is key as well in terms of dealing with the climate crisis.
Absolutely. They like the model is kind of unbelievable when you think about it. So as seaweed grows, it basically kind of like sequesters carbon that is dissolved in the water, which by actually kind of like fixing this carbon, it lowers the acidity of the ocean, which is really good for seashell. That actually like is the first kind of like first line of kind of like destruction when the level of CO2 increase in the ocean. So that's why a lot of seaweed farmers will also grow seashell because seashell will grow faster next to a seaweed farm. So there's like a permaculture opportunities. And as seaweed grows, about like 25% of its biomass is eaten by fish to boost the biodiversity and the fisheries around the seaweed farm. Another 25% gets broken off by the waves and currents, especially in the winter, and that falls to the bottom of the ocean and it sequesters carbon on the oceanic floor for kind of like thousands of years. And then with what's kind of like left on the lines, you can actually replace plastic, which inevitably kind of like finds its way into the ocean. So it feels like there's really like a
It's good. Yeah.
60 kind of like regenerative story here. Um, like any human activity, there's always a good way and a bad way to do it. So there's a few kind of like things that we are kind of like keen to avoid. But unlike agriculture on land, where we've really kind of like demonstrated how bad we can do that job, in the ocean you can't control like the waves. Like you can't fertilize seaweed because the next wave has taken your fertilizer and like it's extremely kind of like inefficient. So this zero input like aquaculture model is a lot less risky to do for humans than the way we've approached agriculture on land, which is something that is quite beautiful as well. It's like very, very hard to screw up.
I think it's a wonderful story. I mean, you describe your goal is to make packaging disappear, and you also state in some of the communications that products should be easy on nature and everything already exists in the playbook of nature. I love that. Can you explain what you mean?
Yeah, and I'll link this to something that has been like quite essential for Notpla. So I made the reference to the fact that we are we're the first and like currently only kind of like government certified plastic free solution in the Dutch market and the European Union. Because essentially for a while the definition of plastic was a bit blurry. There were people who were claiming to be plastic free when actually they were using plastics made from plants. But the thing is, you can start from a plant, but if you chemically modify it to the point that it's plastic, it doesn't exist in nature. This molecule is like unknown to the natural environment. Really, like you're not creating kind of like something that nature can deal with easily. And so that first generation of bioplastics, like the main one being PLA, it's really kind of like created confusion in people's mind because they think that if it started as a plant, it's still kind of a plant, but it's not. It's creating the same microplastics. It doesn't break down in nature. It's really just kind of like plastic made from plants. And so the European Union introduced this definition of plastic polymers and non-plastic polymers very kind of like clearly back in 2018 when they introduced this dead turtle logo that you might have seen
Yep.
like the
Remember it?
packaging in Europe. And essentially it's a test on two criteria. The first one is this polymer abundant in nature? And the second one is, did you chemically modify this polymer? And so when you kind of like are kind of like fine on those two tests, you're essentially a unmodified natural polymer and you're not plastic. And that's what has been the unique kind of like nature of Notpla when the Dutch government lab tested all those materials on the market, is that none of them were natural and unmodified. They could only find Notpla to be exactly the same match as what you find in a piece of seaweed. And so that really kind of like created to us an external validation of what we were doing and a signal to the market that unmodified natural polymers, they really are the building block of nature. Like when you think
Mm,
like your hair, your skin, like the Christmas tree behind you, cellulose, like lignin,
mm,
all of those are the building blocks of nature.
mm,
And we've been a little bit lazy and we focused a bit too much of our attention on petrochemically derived materials that are maybe a bit easier to work with. But the world itself has built itself with the Lego blocks that have been around for kind of like millions of years, and it works. And so
mm.
we should be paying more attention to the existing Lego blocks rather than creating new ones. And I think this category of natural polymers is bound to grow. We actually created the Natural Polymers Group, reaching out to a few other innovators in our space to say, hey, like we're going to be an industry. We're going to be one of the strategies for eliminating single-use plastics and like plastics in nature. So let's
Mm.
try to kind of like come together with a little bit more kind of like visibility.
Great idea.
So that's the playbook of nature. Like, let's use the materials that already exist in nature.
Mm.
It's a bit hard to set up in the first place, but once you've kind of like found a way to harness the power of nature, it's incredible because if you lose it anywhere in nature, it's just like losing a piece of seaweed. It's never going to create forever waste.
So what does 10 years, what does success look like for you?
So I think like 30 million single-use plastics replaced is a nice industrial kind of like milestone, but it's a drop in the ocean of what uh, the plastic industry produces today. So I'd like to add like at least a couple of zeros on that number by then. But I think the really exciting thing for us is that we started introducing our products in the market, like these types of kind of like takeaway food containers. Of our own efforts, getting the kind of like the brand owners to recognize that like they wanted something that they can trust and that is truly kind of like plastic free. And the best way to do that was to kind of like take full control of the products and the manufacturing and so on with total manufacturing partners. But I think now it's time for us to integrate more deeply in the value chain because we want to work with everyone. We want to work with kind of like big paper mills and bring directly in line our coating as a solution to replace the current kind of like synthetics that they use in their process. And so I think that this integration is not easy because those are humongous machines. They are kind of like you stop them for a day, it's like millions of pounds of kind of like revenue that you're losing. Like so, it's a big game that we are kind of like starting to play now. But that's really I think the success is when we are fully integrated with like some of the big paper mills and paper machines. We will have a much larger impact that where we can have on our own.
And where are you going to source um, talent from in the future? And are there any current opportunities that you might want to talk about?
Yeah. It's in one end it's really hard because there's not like a master's in seaweed packaging,
Mm.
and there is like internally at Notpla we have our onboarding program is called the Seaweed Academy, so that's the closest thing there is to a seaweed master's. But essentially, like we have to kind of like be a bit creative about how we bring people externally who are gonna bring some hard skills, but at the same time be open-minded about how we do things. Recruiting chemists with the ground rule being like we don't do chemical modification. That's a little
Mm.
bit kind of like counter, but then you find like a lot of like really amazing strategies to get the most out of like those existing natural polymers without kind of like transforming them. And so we've been trying to find the right balance of uh, young bright kind of like graduates who really want to be at the forefront of resolving the problem of the plastic crisis, and a healthy dose of like industry experts and people who've been on those mills and developing chemically derived kind of like coatings before, so that together we can get the best of both worlds. I think being based in London is really helpful for that because we are kind of like it's quite a central place worldwide to be based. But we spend a lot of time on the road with like our manufacturing partners because there's no kind of like paper mill in London. They are mostly in Finland, right? So yeah, so there's like a little bit of that balance of just finding healthy dose of challenge from like young, kind of like doctrinated minds, and at the same time the gray hair that like makes us not repeat mistakes again and again.
Well, perhaps we can put a link into where somebody should contact you, and we can put that in the post.
And all our
Um,
jobs
ma-
are on notpla.com. If you scroll to the bottom, there's a career page.
okay.
Always looking for
No,
people.
that's great. That's great. I mean, given the growing regulatory pressures that you touched on plastic packaging, PFAS, we all know about PFAS now, don't we? Recyclability and chemical safety generally. Do you see Notpla as an opportunity for brands to get ahead of regulation rather than chase it?
I think massively. I think like continuously kind of like chasing new regulations and like using loopholes to get like a year or two of kind of like extension of what you're doing. Brands are tired of this. So our kind of like our biggest kind of like partnership that is relevant to mention in this is with Levy. They are the stadium division of Campus Group, and they have a really fantastic leadership team who wants to be kind of like a business that is kind of like doing its kind of like its job to improve health and kind of like planet and people kind of like objectives alongside being a well-run, economically kind of like successful business. And so um, they really wanted to kind of like switch to something that was not going to be kind of like taken away in 2 years by some new regulation that actually is doing a little bit more scrutiny and actually realize that there is a little bit more plastic than we thought.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so they were really kind of like doing due diligence on some of those products like aqueous dispersion coatings. Those are like a mix of like polystyrene, polyacrylates, microplastics that are mixed with water and applied on board for kind of like waterproofing and greaseproofing. And at the time there was like maybe a little less kind of like diligence on this, and there were lots of solutions claiming to be plastic free that were literally using those kind of like those acrylates and those styrenes. And so they were kind of like they don't have a master's in materials, so it's very hard for operators to know who to trust because everyone is saying like, "Hey, I'm the real deal." And so I think to them seeing the validation from the Dutch government itself that we were kind of like plastic free, that was the thing that made them feel that it was not just like a good marketing pitch that they could sell internally and that's kind of like good for the next 2 years. It was truly backed by kind of like a scientific approach. And I have the feeling that like there's more and more players that are kind of like doing this in the market, not only just for kind of like plastic waste and the tendency that they have to kind of like want to eliminate waste because waste is quite visible. But I think the next big thing that we are seeing, especially in the US, is around microplastic and health. There's a
Contamination.
kind of
Yeah.
like wave that is kind of like building up. And so lots of companies, they just can't wait to find like an alternative because they know that this is something that they're going to really kind of like lose a lot of trust with their clients on,
Yeah.
especially kind of like as new studies, there's like a Netflix documentary in the making and so on. So I think there's going to be a bit of like a hot moment around microplastic and health that is going to make lines shift.
Definitely. I mean, there was the BBC Panorama
Yeah.
documentary just this week about predominantly about, well, it was about PFAS, wasn't it? But I think the public are really starting to realize what a huge risk toxification is becoming. In fact, my son works in the reinsurance industry, and toxification of PFAS is now number three on the
Wow.
long-term tail risks. Number one is climate change. Number two is cyber. Number three is toxification of PFAS.
Mm.
There you go.
Oh, yeah.
So come on,
And I
let's
think
talk.
it needs to get to that level of acceptance everywhere
Yeah,
to really have the shift that we need.
as much as we can talk about the environmental and social impacts, sadly, business, it's only when it really starts to hit risk, hit
Yeah,
profitability, um, that real change comes.
yeah,
And I think the insurance industry will probably be the final shove actually that's required. And backed up by regulations and legislation. Let's talk about you, shall we, Pierre? Come on, because we've talked a lot about the business, but I want to talk about you for a bit. So who inspires you and has had the biggest influence on your life so far?
it's funny, like reflecting on this, it's really hard to kind of like talk just about one person. I think there's lots of people that like inspire me. Uh, I think like there are different kind of like types of inspiration. I think my parents have been like really key in giving me the kind of like the confidence to go and like try something of your own rather than like maybe avoiding the risk of failure. And I think that they've been really good. Like my mom is a entrepreneur herself at like a small level of having created like a little like company doing like teaching art to and painting to adults in
Right.
our hometown. And it doesn't have kind of like growth ambitions, but it still means that you need to kind of like put yourself out there. You need to create things. You need to wear multiple hats. So that's quite kind of like something that I think I was exposed to. Um, and I think I was always kind of like quite encouraged to wear the inventor hat. My grandma used to say like, "I'm sure you're gonna be an inventor." I had like all these like crazy ideas when I was a kid of kind of like things for like cleaning my room faster or kind of like sorting out my toys or whatever. So I think that was like very positive kind of like reinforcement. But there's one person that like has really inspired me in terms of kind of like the leadership style. Jacinda Ardern, the like New Zealand Prime Minister,
Oh,
ex-Prime
brilliant.
Minister.
Yeah,
Um,
brilliant.
and I think that like in this world where all of the kind of like the world leaders, the billionaires, there is this kind of like attitude of being like brash and like you need to be aggressive, and it's just kind of like this alpha kind of like fight.
Fully.
I
Yeah.
think that it's really refreshing to see people who lead with kindness
Yeah.
and like authenticity and like actually kind of like deliver some great results. And so it was kind of like unbelievable moment for me to actually kind of like get the chance to meet her actually
Did
several
you?
times
Oh,
now,
wow.
thanks to the Usher Prize because she's on the board of the Usher Prize.
All
And
right.
and to have like I mean like it's always a bit risky, right? Like the moment where you meet kind of like someone that you've kind of like really like highly regarded, and she just easily like
You
how
didn't
you
go,
mentioned
you didn't sort
exactly
of
like
go,
certainly
cave in.
like starstruck, but like really impressed by kind of like just how like human and normal
Yeah.
and kind of like authentic she is, and so I think that like it's something that with my co-founder Rodrigo, we try to kind of like be ourselves as we're growing this company, and I think it's really nice to have examples out there of people who have kind of like done this at like such a high level of scrutiny and kind of like exposure and still maintain this kind of like human value rather than kind of like showing up in armor every day.
I thought you were going to say Prince William, because you've met
I
him, haven't you, of course?
Yeah, I can't be like a fanboy of everyone at the Herschel Prize on one single podcast, but obviously like Prince William has been like incredible
Yeah.
in his support, and he actually is also kind of like a big fan of seaweed, and he's been very kind of like catalytic in getting the seaweed UK ecosystem together, and like he puts his heart in this Herschel Prize, so he's been like the convener of like all these like brilliant people, and so. I owe it to him to meet Jacinda Ardern. So,
You're a very modest man. I like that. So, what do you think are the key ingredients for successful leadership?
um,
You've actually mentioned a couple of them just now.
yeah. So I think like beyond that, like, and I think everyone is different, and I like, for example, like we are both co-founders and co-CEO with Rodrigo. I think that's the model that works for us. I'm like I can't imagine Notpla like operating or kind of like having gone through the journey and being more successful if it was just one of us. We've been kind of like so complementary, and I think it will requires a like an ability to work together that not everyone is going to be able to have, but like when you have that, that's actually kind of magic.
Mm.
The model of co-CEO is kind of like growing in popularity. Just seeing like Daniel X standing down from Spotify and putting kind of like co-CEOs. There's more examples, but I think that like um, we so certainly kind of like being authentic is something that I think is just important in the long run. You can't kind of like wear a mask forever. Um, and because we all have like imposter syndrome to a certain extent, I think that like it relieves a little bit of the pressure of having to show up one way or another. I think the other one that like they really like don't teach you is like networking skills, but like actually so much of it is interpersonal kind of like relationship building. And I think that the Earth Prize is actually like quite interesting where they've really recognized the need to kind of like support founders on or kind of like leaders of it could be non-business kind of like that are going through the Earth Prize of just kind of like maximizing those opportunities of connecting with the right people that can change the game for you. And I think that having seen a few people who are really good at this, it's just kind of like such a door opener. And if you don't have that, I think you're making life much harder for yourself. And so beyond just having like a technical solution that works, a new technology, the
You've got to put
process and
yourself out there,
on,
like your
you
mum
gotta put
taught you,
yourself out
right?
there. You gotta find your own internal champions. You gotta make them fall in love with what you're doing.
Yeah,
And I think when they do, it's magic.
yeah, yeah. Good advice. So, what was the first job you had? Oh no, we've done that. I mean, you've told us about your first job. I don't think we need to go into that. What do people say about you? Do you think when you're not in the room?
Oh, I've done a few too many 360 feedback sessions in the past few years to be kind of like blissfully ignorant about those kind of like those things. I mean like I think focusing on like the positive ones. I'm like I'm a passionate guy, and I think I have like an ability to transfer that passion to kind of like people who spend a bit of time with me. So like one of our kind of like early values at Notpla was positive attitude, and I think it was literally kind of like just modeled after kind of like the excitement that I kind of like always show up with when I'm kind of like talking about something new or what we can do. So that is something that I think is kind of like coming through quite clearly. Um, I'm quite kind of like big picture. I'm not kind of like a very deep detail Excel spreadsheet guy. So I'll get lost if it's kind of like missing the context. But I really love how kind of like we've been able to create a bit the kind of like the mix in the team that like we all have each other's back with
What
different skills
skills?
and
Yeah.
different kind of like approach to things. So yeah, so I think I'm quite good at like being the guy who's going to kind of like galvanize around like a shared vision, even if it's quite like distant. So I
Mhm.
would imagine that people can say that about me when I'm not in the room.
Very good, very good. So, come on, tell us something extraordinary about you that maybe you haven't shared before.
Uh, that's a risky one. No,
I've had some funny ones of these over the time.
I think what like working in these kind of like startups is obviously kind of like a very kind of like intense weight on the day to day. There's like now like 55 people whose kind of like salaries depend on Rodrigo and myself, and the whole team has a shared responsibility. But I think that like it's fair to say that it comes with kind of like its own weight. And so I think like I've been lucky to quite early on know what is my way of like switching off my brain to something else and like recharging batteries. which has led me to do a number of little creative kind of like experiments over the years. But I try to keep a little of space in the weekends or evenings for those creative hobbies. So I started kind of like an Instagram page a few years back that is all about generative art. Like it's basically kind of like math and kind of like logics inspired graphical explorations that myself, but like a lot of other artists are kind of like doing. And unexpectedly, it's really kind of like grown, and it's got 150,000 followers. And like at that point, we started
Wow.
to like do
What's the
uh,
name of it?
it's
What's
called
the what's the
Generative Hut on
generative hut?
Instagram. Yeah.
Mm,
And
okay.
basically, like we what started as a really kind of like a complete kind of like side experiment turned into a nice little side creative hobby. And from there, we actually kind of like with like a partner I kind of like found along the way. We did a couple of books using also kind of like augmented reality to kind of like discover some of those generative arts in motion through the pages of the book. And so yeah, like that is kind of like something nice to do on the side,
Nice.
kind of like Notpla, that actually kind of like has the ability to take you on a completely different space. So you
Yeah.
have like maybe the background processing of all the seaweed stuff continues, but like at the foreground, you're kind of like focusing on something that is a lot more.
We could probably spend another hour talking about AI, augmented reality, and all of that, and 3D printing, and the fourth industrial revolution, things that I'm also very interested in. But we don't have time today. Sounds fascinating, but I will check that out. I'm sure people listening will. So my last question, and then I'll let you, because I know we've got a hard stop at 12, is what book or film is your favorite and has had the most impact on you?
Um, so it's quite bad because like I don't read a lot of books. I read a lot of kind of like articles, but like and my wife she kind of like devours books, so she's like a really good learner, a good reader. I'm not too kind of like drawn into those long formats, at least kind of like recently. Uh, but I'll tell you about like the last book that I read that like really caught my attention. Last summer is it's a book written by someone that I know well who's been kind of like very influential in the world of seaweed. Vincent Dumézel, he's the UN envoy for kind of like seaweed. But his latest kind of like focus has been actually on plankton, because we don't talk a lot about plankton, but like actually plankton is kind of essential to kind of like the health of the ocean, and more than the ocean, like the creation of oxygen and the carbon capture, and therefore our kind of like conditions for decent life on this planet for humans. And so he's written this book, which currently is only in French, but it's going to be translated soon, which is basically like the Plankton Manifesto, and it
Brilliant.
just kind of like tells through stories of some of the kind of like pioneers in the field of plankton, but also kind of like some of the like little known facts about just kind of like how plankton is incredibly kind of like interconnected to everything. Um, just how little we know about one of the things that is so important for kind of like our survival. And so I just kind of like read it kind of like cover to cover in a couple of days. And so
When's it coming out? When's it being published in
I think
English?
like I'll have to check, but I would say like maybe kind of like mid next year, something like this.
Come on, get AI to do it. You can do it out next week or out this
Like
afternoon.
I think it's more like who's got the rights or what. I don't know how it works, but like essentially a really good book that if you don't know anything about plankton but you're curious,
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
quite
brilliant.
an amazing kind of like deep dive. And what I will say is like his first book, which is now translated in English, is called The Seaweed Revolution, and it's the seminal book on seaweed. And that one, I mean, it actually features Notpla, so that's always a good thing for us. But like anyone interested in seaweed should start there. That's just got like everything you need to know, from kind of like some incredible kind of like little known facts about how seaweed has saved the game for humans over kind of like the centuries without
Mm.
us knowing, to some of the future applications, whether it's like packaging, proteins, medicine, carbon capture, etc. So it's a like that one is available in English and it's a good read, maybe a good Christmas present for a few people.
Somebody. And what about movie? What's your favorite movie? Doesn't have to be serious, by the way. It can be a funny one or a daft one.
Uh, I've just been well, like TV series. I've just been binging the latest episodes of Stranger Things. Just love the kind of like
Okay.
ambience, and I went to the secret cinema that they did like a few years back, and it's just like a bit of nostalgia, and I love just the general vibe and like the slightly cheesiness of kind of like everything incredibly unlikely outcome is always the one that happens. So that's my
Very good.
like scene.
Very good. Well, look, one thing I'll say, Pascal, I mean, I don't know you that well. I think we've met once, haven't we? Um, and we've had a couple of conversations, but one thing that always comes across is your incredible passion. I mean, it oozes out of you, which is wonderful to see, and you really are inspiring. Thank you so much for your time
No worries.
and for sharing, very openly your story. It's very much appreciated. And I wish you and your wife a lovely Christmas.
Thank you, you too, and thanks for having me.